Okay guys, so let's go ahead and move on to setting up your bass for week 1. And I do apologize, I couldn't help myself. I jumped ahead a little bit by setting up my bass right here on this kind of marigold yellowy orange track. But not to worry, I'm going to show you exactly everything that I did. It actually is quite minimal. So as you remember, we have our drums in purple. And what I'm going to do is create a new MIDI track by going up to Instruments, and when you clear this box out, if you don't see any instruments, when you clear this box out, they'll all appear. When you search for something, it obviously discriminates everything except for what you're searching for. So when you clear that, everything is an option again. I went ahead. I do apologize. I'm traveling right now, and I'm actually at a cafe, so if you can hear other noises in the background, sorry about that. But once again, the whole point of this course is we're not going to stop and we're not going to wait just because outside conditions are not perfect. So remind yourself of that, because if you wait for life to be perfect, you're going to be waiting a long time. I went ahead and just went into analog. So this is what you'll probably see when you pull up your instruments. Just a lot of different options here. Analog, I just went with it. No real particular reason why. I barely use it, to be honest, but I tried it this time around. Electric has bass in it, which you could use. Not much, but operator, I'm a big fan of as well. There is no right or wrong. I was basically just going for something that essentially would give me a nice low end, but also I'd be able to hear while doing the tutorial through laptop speakers or through headphones. So what we're gonna do, what did I drag in? I drag Saw 3 Pure right there. So just click and drag that in, or whichever one you like, really. But if you kind of want to stay on track and not have sort of mismatches, which can actually create a lot of grief, I would probably just follow along with me for now and pick the Saw 3 Pure bass. Let's color it something very different, so that way it doesn't get confused with my yellow Saw 3 bass. Okay, so what I did essentially was I click and dragged over. And usually with things like tech house or house music, usually it's just a 1-bar loop. So we're going to go ahead and Control Shift M to set up a 1-bar, as you can see, from 1 to 2, 1-bar MIDI clip. And what I basically did up here with my MIDI, I think I actually started off with this pattern over here, which essentially, and maybe for time I'll drag this one in, it's D1 to F1 to D1 to B0, all in the course of 1 bar, 8th notes. So click onto our MIDI here, right click, 8th notes, D1, let me just make this a little bit wider, to F1, I think it was to D, and then down to B, if I'm not mistaken. Well, it would help if I only had one bass line playing. And let me just double check, because that seems a little wacky. D1, B, oh yeah, I think that's right. 1.1.3, that's why. And by the time I correct all this, I should just drag it all in, which is probably what I'm going to do just to save time on this. So 8th notes, yeah, take it, drag it in, and then you guys obviously Control drag over. You guys can copy this pattern I'm just doing this to save time so the video doesn't get out of control on time. But okay, so yeah, there we go. So the pattern that I was painting in was a little bit too slow. I wasn't picking up on the fact that this is a much faster moving pattern. Cool. Now, here's what I did and why you're seeing... Shrink this up so you can see it. The reason why you're seeing all these different MIDI clips is because all I did was Control D and I just changed it slightly. So basically, for every bass line that I create, I have a new track. Because, I mean, let's think about it with house music. Once you have your drums set up and you start altering different grooves, different bass lines, you basically have, I would say, 50 to 60% of your track done. You slap maybe some piano on there and some vocals, and really, what more do you need for a good dance track, for a good groove? Now, of course, there's arrangement, mixing, and mastering, but I'm just talking about a general idea. You've got something good going on. So, with that said, you can do two different things with your pattern to start creating different bass lines. You can keep the notes and affect the length, something maybe like this. Okay? Not too bad. Has a nice groove to it. Barely changed anything, but it's got a very nice groove to it. Okay, there's that one. Now there's this one. Okay, so basically there's two songs right there. A lot of house music bass lines kind of loop over the course of a bar's length, or a half bar's length. So you've got two grooves right there that you can work with. Now, just move that over using your arrow keys, and let's keep it going. Click, copy, duplicate, and let's go back in. And another way that you can do this, why is this not working? Is not only affect the length of notes, but you can also affect the order of the notes. So start off simple, change that F and that D around, so bring the F down to D, bring the D up to F. Not too bad. Want something a little bit different? Well, you're on an 8th grid, so you can shrink these up if you like, or what you can do is bring it to 16th and have a little bit more of a cut and dry understanding of where your note lengths stop. Do something like that. Now, here's the thing. I'm jumping ahead a little bit in that I'm assuming that you kind of have a general understanding of setting up the theory of bass lines and the theory of notes for that. Essentially, a bass line is monophonic, so for the most part, bass lines usually play one note at a time. So what I mean by that is you're never going to see a bass chord. I shouldn't say never, but it's highly unlikely, very highly unlikely, that you're going to see a chord like that for a bass line. It's one note at a time, and when you go to switch notes, the previous note ends. You don't often see overlap like that, So just something to keep in mind, like with that. And what we'll do is in the next video, we're going to go over how to set this up theory-wise, so that way you have a little bit more of a concrete understanding of music theory. And I'll try to make that as painless as I can for you. Here's the thing, though, guys. When it comes to a bass line like this, you can just do what sounds good. A lot of times in house music, and depending on the kind of house music that you're making, you don't really have to worry too much about real strong melodies and harmonies and chords making sense with bass lines, because a lot of times, at least with the kind of house music that Heart House Records is creating right now, we're just not using a lot of chords on top of bass lines, and therefore not having to worry a whole lot about, well, with this bass line being the notes of D, B, and F, am I in D major or D minor? What am I going to do for my chords? It isn't really anything that you need to sweat too much about, because honestly, we're not really using chords. That's pretty much our groove. We're going to use maybe a lead line on top of this, and for me that means steel drums or some kind of summery tropical style instrument that's usually short and percussive, and or some sort of vocal on top of this. So as long as that vocal pretty much starts in D and is basically a classic tech housey kind of ad-libby thing, there's not really any melody being expressed through the vocal anyways. It's more of a percussive, quick ad-lib kind of thing. So it's just not real imperative. It's not real relevant in this situation. Could we split hairs and argue that? Sure. I mean, I could even, pose an argument against myself about that. But for the most part, with this kind of music, that's something that you can kind of relax a little bit on. If we were making uplifting trance where there were pianos and pads and bass lines and lead lines and a melodic female vocal that's actually singing a song, we'd be in trouble with this kind of thought process. But in this case, we're not. So be at ease with that. In the next video, I'll show you how to kind of theorize bass lines, so that way you can make a little bit more sense of this and kind of enter into more of a classical stance of music theory. But for the most part with house music, just have fun with it like I just did. What I just did here with the whole copying and duplicating, just moving the notes around and the patterns and the lengths, rinse and repeat that 10 times like I did up here, however many times are up here. Just keep doing that. Let it be a half bar length, let it be a whole bar length, let it be 2 bars lengths. And take that and use that as ideas for this song or your next song. And I mean, right here, if I used every single one of these bass lines, I'd basically have the foundation for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's an album right there of groovy house music. Boom. Get some vocals, get some lead lines, mix it, master it, you've got an album. And it's not really an issue that it took me a matter of less than an hour to come up with all these bass lines and just keep duplicating the original pattern and keep morphing from the original pattern into new patterns. There's no harm or shame in that, because really it doesn't necessarily have to be about that. A good groove is a good groove. So just keep that in mind, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.